Before this year ends, I'll become Mrs. Roland. This is it. Soon, this will all be mine.
Sophia?
Jason, I thought I'd never see you again.
Sophia?
Jason.
Some secrets are better left buried.
Jessica thought she had won. She believed the hardest part of her journey was over, that every difficult choice she had made had finally led her to the life she had always dreamed of. She walked through the doors of a billionaire's mansion with confidence, smiled beside a man every woman admired, and imagined herself wearing his engagement ring before the year was over. But what Jessica didn't know was that somewhere else in the same city, the woman she had quietly erased from Jason's life was about to return in the most unexpected way. One chance encounter, one forgotten truth, and one secret she believed had been buried forever would soon threaten everything she had built. Sometimes, the greatest danger isn't the lie you tell. It's believing that lie will never catch up with you. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Several months had passed since Mrs. Peace Roland left Evergreen Meadows nursing home. Life had continued for everyone, but not in the way any of them had imagined. The misunderstanding created by a single missing business card had quietly rewritten the lives of 3 people without any of them fully realizing it. Jessica had stepped into a world she had once only admired from a distance. What began as occasional visits to check on Mrs. Peace Roland gradually became something much bigger. The security guards at the Roland estate no longer asked for her name. The housekeepers greeted her with warm smiles before she even reached the front door. The chef knew exactly how she liked her afternoon tea, and the gardeners would often pause their work just long enough to wave as she walked across the beautifully landscaped grounds. Every visit made the mansion feel less like someone else's home and more like a place where she belonged. Jessica couldn't help comparing her new life with the tiny apartment she returned to each evening. Every polished marble floor, every sparkling chandelier, every luxurious painting hanging on the walls reminded her how different life could be when money was no longer something to worry about. She imagined waking up every morning in one of the mansion's elegant bedrooms, hosting charity events in the grand ballroom, and walking beside Jason as photographers captured their picture-perfect life together. At first, those dreams felt almost impossible. But as the weeks passed, they slowly transformed into expectations. In her mind, it wasn't a question of whether she would become Jason Roland's wife. It was simply a matter of when. Jason, meanwhile, continued treating Jessica with the same kindness and respect he had always shown her. He appreciated the time she spent with his mother, believing she was filling the empty space left by Sophia's absence. Whenever business kept him away from home, he felt relieved knowing someone was there to keep Mrs. Peace Roland company. He had no reason to question Jessica's intentions. Every gesture she made appeared thoughtful. Every smile seemed genuine. Every visit looked like another act of kindness. He never imagined that the woman sitting comfortably in his mother's living room had become part of his life because of one decision she had made months earlier. Mrs. Peace Roland, however, began noticing changes that Jason couldn't see. The gentle, respectful nurse she had first met was slowly disappearing. Jessica no longer asked before making herself comfortable in the house. She casually rearranged flowers the housekeepers had already placed, criticized meals prepared by the chef, and sometimes gave instructions to employees as though she already owned the estate. The staff obeyed politely because she was Jason's guest, but many exchanged uncomfortable glances whenever she walked away. Mrs. Peace Roland watched these small moments carefully. They weren't dramatic enough to start an argument, but together they painted a picture she didn't like. One afternoon, while the housekeeper served tea in the sunroom overlooking the gardens, Jessica picked up an expensive porcelain teacup, examined it for a moment, and laughed softly. She remarked that once she married Jason, she planned to replace the entire tea set with something more modern because the current collection looked old-fashioned. The room became unusually quiet. The housekeeper lowered her eyes and quietly continued arranging the table. Mrs. Peace Roland looked at Jessica for several seconds without saying a word. The comment wasn't rude because of the porcelain. It was rude because Jessica had spoken as though the future had already been decided without considering anyone else's feelings. On another visit, Jessica walked into the formal dining room where decorators were preparing for one of the Roland family's charity dinners. Without being asked, she began suggesting where the flowers should be moved and which tablecloths looked more elegant. She even told one of the decorators that she preferred different centerpieces because she wanted the room to feel more luxurious. Mrs. Peace Roland listened from the doorway. The confidence in Jessica's voice wasn't confidence born from kindness or generosity. It was the confidence of someone who had started believing the mansion belonged to her before she had earned a place within it. Jason noticed that his mother had become quieter whenever Jessica visited. Their conversations weren't as lively as they had once been. Mrs. Peace Roland smiled less, excused herself more often, and sometimes preferred sitting alone in the garden instead of joining them in the living room. Jason assumed age was catching up with her or that she simply became tired more easily. He never imagined there was another reason. Whenever he gently asked if something was wrong, his mother simply smiled and told him she was fine. She wasn't ready to explain what she was feeling because she hoped she might be mistaken. She wanted to believe Jessica was simply becoming too comfortable, not revealing who she truly was. As the days turned into weeks, Jessica's confidence continued growing. She started browsing wedding magazines online, saving pictures of designer dresses and luxury venues without telling Jason. She imagined what her engagement ring would look like and wondered whether their honeymoon would be somewhere in Europe or on a private island in the Caribbean. Late at night, she stood in front of her bedroom mirror, practicing how she would react when Jason finally proposed. Sometimes she laughed at herself. Other times she became emotional just imagining the moment. In her heart, she believed destiny had finally rewarded her patience. She had no idea that destiny was quietly arranging a meeting she never saw coming, one that would test every decision she had made and force every hidden truth into the light. Sometimes, the people who leave the deepest mark on our lives never get the chance to say goodbye. One missed phone call, one lost contact, one misunderstanding can quietly close a door that neither person ever wanted to shut. Sophia believed that was exactly what had happened. She convinced herself that some people were only meant to pass through our lives for a season, leaving behind beautiful memories but never returning again. What she didn't know was that somewhere across the city, the woman she thought had forgotten her still spoke her name almost every single day. Fate had only delayed their reunion, and when it finally happened, nothing would ever be the same again. For Sophia Bennett, leaving Evergreen Meadows had been one of the hardest decisions she had ever made. The nursing home had become more than just a workplace. It was where she had spent countless hours comforting lonely residents, celebrating their small victories, listening to stories from decades gone by, and reminding people who often felt forgotten that they still mattered. Every hallway held memories. Every room reminded her of someone whose hand she had held during difficult moments. But after several months, an opportunity arrived that she simply couldn't ignore. A respected rehabilitation hospital on the other side of the city offered her a position with better pay, improved benefits, and opportunities for professional growth. It wasn't an easy choice, but Sophia knew she had to think about her own future. With heartfelt hugs from her co-workers and tearful goodbyes from many of the residents, she walked out of Evergreen Meadows for the final time, believing she was simply closing one chapter of her life and beginning another. The rehabilitation center was larger, faster-paced, and far more demanding than the peaceful environment she had grown accustomed to. Here, patients weren't spending the final years of their lives looking back on cherished memories. They were fighting every single day to reclaim their independence after devastating accidents, complicated surgeries, or life-changing illnesses. Some were learning to walk again after months confined to hospital beds. Others struggled to regain the use of their hands after severe injuries, while many battled discouragement that no medicine alone could heal. Sophia quickly discovered that her greatest strength had never been giving medication or checking vital signs. It was her ability to encourage people when they had almost given up on themselves. She celebrated every small improvement as though it were a miracle. When a patient managed to take just 3 unsteady steps after weeks of therapy, Sophia smiled as if they had crossed an entire marathon finish line. When another patient finally lifted a trembling hand to feed himself for the first time in months, she quietly wiped away tears before congratulating him with genuine excitement. Doctors, therapists, and fellow nurses soon began noticing something different about her. Sophia never rushed conversations. She remembered birthdays, asked about family members by name, and somehow made every patient feel seen in a place where hundreds of people came and went each week. Even during 12-hour shifts that left her physically exhausted, she rarely complained. Her kindness wasn't something she turned on when people were watching. It was simply who she was. Many of the patients requested her by name whenever they returned for follow-up appointments, and families often thanked hospital administrators for hiring someone whose compassion made difficult recoveries feel a little less frightening. Yet despite finding purpose in her new work, there were quiet moments when her thoughts drifted back to evergreen meadows. Certain patients reminded her of Mrs. Peace Roland. A familiar laugh, a favorite hymn softly playing from someone's phone, or even the scent of fresh lavender would suddenly transport her back to afternoons spent talking with the elderly woman who had become so dear to her heart. Sophia often wondered how Mrs. Peace Roland was doing. She hoped Jason had kept his promise to spend more time with his mother. She imagined family dinners filled with laughter, peaceful evenings at the Roland estate, and a woman who no longer felt abandoned because her son had finally come home. Those thoughts always brought a gentle smile to Sophia's face. Every now and then, however, another question quietly entered her mind. Why had no one ever reached out after that day? At first, she believed Jason had simply become busy with work. Then she convinced herself that perhaps Mrs. Peace Roland had forgotten about the invitation altogether. Eventually, she accepted what seemed like the simplest explanation. She had accidentally lost Jason's business card, and with it, the only reliable way to contact the Roland family. She remembered searching every corner of her apartment that evening, emptying her handbag onto the dining table, checking every pocket, every drawer, and even the floor beneath her sofa, hoping the small cream-colored card would somehow appear. It never did. Since her old phone had been damaged before she could transfer her contacts, Mrs. Peace Roland's phone number had disappeared as well. The realization had been heartbreaking, but life moved forward whether she was ready or not. Sophia never blamed Jason or Mrs. Peace Roland. In fact, she blamed herself. She often replayed the day in her mind, wishing she had been more careful. If only she had placed the card somewhere safer. If only she had called sooner. If only she hadn't assumed there would always be another opportunity. Those quiet regrets stayed with her, but they never turned into bitterness. Instead, they became another reminder that life sometimes separates good people through nothing more than unfortunate circumstances. Little did Sophia know that what she believed was a simple accident had been something far more complicated. And while she worked tirelessly helping strangers rebuild their lives, destiny was slowly arranging the moment when the truth would finally find its way back to her. Some moments don't announce themselves with warning. They arrive quietly, disguised as an ordinary day, and in a single heartbeat they change the direction of every life they touch. Jason had spent months believing Sophia had chosen to disappear without a word. Sophia had spent those same months believing Jason had simply forgotten about her. Neither of them knew that one accidental meeting, in the middle of a crowded shopping mall filled with strangers, was about to uncover a truth that had been hidden for far too long. The question was no longer whether they would meet again. The question was whether the truth waiting on the other side of that meeting would bring them together, or tear someone else's world apart forever. Saturday afternoons were usually the busiest time at Brookstone Galleria, one of the city's most luxurious shopping destinations. Elegant boutiques displayed the latest designer collections behind spotless glass windows, families wandered through beautifully decorated corridors, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee drifted from cafes where business executives and shoppers gathered between appointments. It was the kind of place where people from completely different worlds crossed paths every day without ever knowing how connected their lives might become. Jason had arrived just before noon for a meeting with international investors at one of the mall's private executive lounges. The meeting had lasted longer than expected, with discussions stretching from expansion plans to new charitable projects his company hoped to launch before the end of the year. Although the negotiations had gone well, Jason left feeling mentally exhausted. His assistant had already offered to bring his car to the entrance, but Jason declined. He wanted a few quiet minutes to clear his mind before returning to another schedule filled with responsibilities. Carrying nothing more than a cup of coffee and his phone, he walked slowly through the spacious atrium, barely paying attention to the crowds flowing around him. Across the mall, Sophia had just finished another demanding shift at the rehabilitation hospital. After spending 12 straight hours helping patients through difficult therapy sessions, she decided to stop by the mall to replace a pair of comfortable work shoes that had finally worn out after months of long hospital shifts. She also hoped to pick up a birthday gift for one of her younger patients who would soon be discharged after making remarkable progress. Despite the exhaustion she felt in her legs, shopping gave her a brief chance to slow down and enjoy a quiet afternoon before returning home. With several shopping bags in one hand and her phone in the other, Sophia stepped out of a department store while glancing down at a message from one of her co-workers. At that exact moment, Jason rounded the corner from the opposite direction, distracted by an email he had just received from his office. Neither of them noticed the other until it was too late. Their shoulders collided. Jason's coffee slipped from his hand and splashed harmlessly onto the polished floor while Sophia's shopping bags tumbled beside it. Both immediately bent down to gather the scattered items, apologizing at the same time. "I'm so sorry," Jason began automatically. "No, it was my fault," Sophia replied without looking up. As they both reached for the same shopping bag, their hands touched. Jason froze. Something about that familiar voice made him lift his head almost instinctively. Sophia looked up at the very same moment. Everything around them seemed to disappear. The conversations of nearby shoppers faded into silence. The footsteps echoing across the marble floors no longer mattered. Even the busy atmosphere of the mall seemed to stand still as they stared at one another in complete disbelief. Jason's eyes widened. Sophia. For a brief second, she simply stood there, unable to believe what she was seeing. Then a slow smile spread across her face as tears filled her eyes. Jason. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke again. After months of unanswered questions, quiet disappointments, and believing they had been forgotten, fate had finally brought them face to face. Neither of them realized that the conversation waiting just a few moments ahead would uncover a secret capable of changing every relationship they thought they understood. Some conversations don't just answer old questions, they expose truths that change everything you thought you knew. For months, Jason believed he had been rejected without explanation. For months, Sophia carried the quiet pain of believing she had simply been forgotten. Neither of them was angry. Neither blamed the other. They had both accepted a version of the past that felt painful but believable. What they were about to discover was far more heartbreaking. Sometimes, the greatest betrayal isn't committed in front of you. Sometimes, it quietly steals months of your life before you even realize it happened. Still stunned by their unexpected reunion, Jason and Sophia stood in silence for several moments, almost afraid that speaking would somehow make the moment disappear. Finally, Jason glanced toward a nearby cafe overlooking the mall's central atrium and smiled gently. He suggested they sit down for a few minutes, explaining that after waiting so many months for answers, neither of them should rush back to their busy lives without talking. Sophia agreed with a quiet nod. As they settled into a corner table with 2 cups of coffee between them, the awkwardness slowly gave way to familiar comfort. It felt strangely natural, as though the months apart had disappeared the moment they saw each other again. Jason was the first to break the silence. Looking directly into Sophia's eyes, he spoke with a mixture of relief and quiet disappointment that had weighed on his heart for months. "I thought you chose never to come." There was no accusation in his voice, only genuine confusion. Sophia looked at him in complete surprise before lowering her eyes toward her untouched coffee. After a long pause, she answered softly, "I thought you forgot me." Those few words hung between them, and for the first time, both realized they had been living 2 completely different versions of the same story. Jason frowned slightly, unable to understand. He reminded Sophia that he had personally invited her to dinner and handed her his business card before leaving Evergreen Meadows. Sophia nodded immediately. She remembered every detail of that afternoon. With an embarrassed smile, she admitted she had accidentally lost the card while returning home after work. She explained how she searched every pocket of her handbag, emptied everything onto her dining table, and even retraced her steps the next morning, hoping to find it. She also told him that when she replaced her damaged phone, she discovered she had forgotten to back up many of her contacts, including Mrs. Roland's number. Without the card and without the saved contact, she had no way to reach either of them again. She confessed that she blamed herself every day for being so careless and assumed Jason had eventually moved on with his life. Jason listened without interrupting, but something deep inside him began to shift. None of what Sophia was saying sounded like someone making excuses. Every word felt honest. Every detail fit together naturally. Then, almost casually, Sophia added something she considered unimportant. She smiled faintly and said, "Actually, Jessica drove me home that evening. She was kind enough to offer me a ride after work." The moment those words left her mouth, Jason stopped breathing for what felt like several seconds. His expression changed so subtly that Sophia barely noticed. His mind immediately returned to that missing business card, the unanswered invitation, Jessica's unexpected closeness to his family, and the months she had repeatedly told him Sophia was simply too busy to visit. Jason didn't speak. He didn't jump to conclusions. He didn't accuse Jessica of anything. Instead, he quietly replayed every conversation he had shared with her since that day. Every excuse suddenly sounded different. Every explanation took on a new meaning. The pieces that had never quite fit together were beginning to form a picture he never wanted to imagine. Sophia noticed the sudden silence and asked gently if everything was all right. Jason looked at her, his eyes filled with disbelief rather than anger. He leaned forward slightly and spoke so quietly that only she could hear. "Sophia. I think someone kept us apart." Those words settled heavily between them. Neither of them spoke again. And for the first time since they met, they both realized that what they believed had been an unfortunate accident might have been something else entirely. The truth was finally beginning to surface, but neither of them could have imagined how many lives it was about to change. What do you think really happened? Did Jessica intentionally keep Jason and Sophia apart, or was it all just one terrible misunderstanding? Share your thoughts in the comments below, we read every single one. If you enjoyed episode 4, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications because episode 5 is the explosive finale of this unforgettable story. The truth is finally coming out. Hearts will be broken. Secrets will be exposed. And one woman will receive the proposal she never saw coming. We'll see you in episode 5.